The commander of Kampili prison camp was named Yamaji, and he appointed me the leader of Barracks 8 because I could speak Dutch, Indonesian, and English, and I was shown a lot of respect even though I was only 27 years old. I tried so hard to work with Mr. Yamaji, but he was so temperamental. Once I was trying to explain to him a better way to boil water that would use less bamboo. I was very enthusiastic. And finally, I stopped because I realized how quiet he'd become. And he yelled at me, "You talk too much!" And he smacked me across the back of my neck. I didn't cry in front of him. And the next morning, they were building a new stove exactly the way I described him. There were flies in Kampili prison camp because part of our duties was to raise pigs for the Japanese army. And pigs create flies. Not only that, there was no good sewage system for any of us there, for people or animals. And flies caused disease, and everyone in camp suffered from chronic dysentery. And even our captors were upset about it because people who are sick might die, and they certainly can't work effectively. So Commander Yamaji decided that every woman in the camp needed to deliver to him 100 dead flies every day. If a woman didn't deliver, she might be beaten. So we took it very seriously and went over to the piggery and slapped our hands in the air trying to catch enough flies. Well, the pigs didn't like that. So Commander Yamaji said they had to come from other parts of the camp. If at the end of the day a woman didn't have 100 dead flies, she would go over to the putrid smelling outhouses, and sometimes with one clap of the hands, you could get 5 dead flies. Finally, Commander Yamaji grew tired of counting dead flies, and their requirement was ended. One morning, Mrs. Yastra, our Dutch supervisor, came to speak to me and asked to speak to me alone. We walked up and down between the barracks discussing work schedules, and then she said, "Mrs. Steibler, I didn't come to talk to you about work. I came to tell you your husband has been very ill." I saw her eyes fill with tears, and I said, "Oh, Mrs. Yastra, you don't mean he's gone?" She said, "Yes, 3 months ago he died in Pari Pari, the men's camp." Right then I felt like God had forsaken me, and I said, "But God," and I heard his voice saying, "Have I not told you? When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned." All over camp, people heard the news and came to share their love and their concern for me. And that afternoon, I was told Mr. Yamaji wanted to speak to me, so I went to his office. He stood behind his desk and said, "Mrs. Steibler, this is war." "I understand that," I said. "The news you have heard today that your husband has died, many Japanese women have heard also." "Yes, sir, I understand that." "Mrs. Steibler, someday this war will be over, and you can go back to America, and you can go dancing again. I ask you because you have been a big help to the women at this camp. Please do not lose your smile." "Mr. Yamaji," I said, "do I have permission to speak to you?" He nodded. "I don't grieve as much as people who have no hope. I want to tell you about someone about whom you may have never heard. I learned about him in Sunday school when I was a little girl. His name is Jesus, and he is the Son of Almighty God, the creator of heaven and earth. And Jesus puts love in our hearts, even for our enemies." I went on to explain the whole plan of salvation to Mr. Yamaji, and I saw tears streaming down his face. I repeated to him, "He gives us love even for our enemies, so I don't hate you, Mr. Yamaji. In fact, perhaps Jesus brought me here to this place at this time just so I could tell you about him." Mr. Yamaji got up, trying hard not to weep, and he walked into the other room. And I stood there for a long time, and finally I realized he would not return, and I walked quietly back to Barracks 8. They led me into the secret police prison, into a cell that had the sign, "Who is here will die." The guard saw my Bible and took it along with my rings, and they shut the door behind me. It was 3 days before they even brought me any food, but it was a good thing because I was very, very sick and couldn't have eaten. I had chronic dysentery, and finally, when they did bring me food, they saw how sick I was and brought me terrible medicine. Every few days, they would come and get me from the cell and take me to a room where 2 Japanese secret policemen would interrogate me on my spying activities. They would say, "For whom were you spying? Who are your contacts? And how did you get a radio?" When I protested that I wasn't a spy, I didn't have any contacts, and I didn't have a radio, they would hit me across the back of the neck, or they would thump me in the middle of my forehead. My forehead got terribly bruised, and sometimes I thought my neck was broken. I never cried during those interrogations, but when I got back to my cell, I cried buckets of tears. There was so little food, they brought me rice, but it was filled with maggots, but that was all there was to eat. And I got sicker and sicker. There was nothing in the cell to do except kill mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes had given me malaria. I was so hot and feverish during the day, and at night I would get very cold because there was nothing, no blanket, no coat, no sweater. I didn't know how long I could live. One day when I was very, very hot, I realized I could climb up onto a little shelf that was on the wall and pull myself up to a small barred window, and that way I could get a cool breeze of air on my face. And I could also look down into the courtyard. And I saw someone in the courtyard eating a banana. Right then, I wanted a banana so badly, and I cried out to God and told him how hungry I was for a banana, and could he please have someone bring me a banana? And then I felt guilty for asking God to do something to answer a prayer that it wasn't possible for him to answer. There was no one who would bring me a banana. Those cruel, competent secret police officers who beat me up weren't going to bring me a banana. And the little guard, he would be in big trouble if he helped me. So I had to ask God to forgive me. Lord, I'm sorry. I don't mean to ask you to do that. I am thankful for the rice. The next morning, I could hear the officer's footsteps in the hall, and I struggled to get on my feet to do a proper bow. I thought I would be taken to another interrogation. But when the cell door opened, there stood Mr. Yamaji. He had a big smile on his face until he saw me and said, "You're very sick, aren't you?" "Yes," I said. He said, "The women at Campili miss you very much. Is there anything you want me to tell them?" "Tell them I still trust in the Lord." And he left looking very concerned. Soon then I heard the footsteps again. But when the door opened, there was no one there. But there was a bunch of 92 bananas.